So for a while now I've wanted to make a video that showed adding audio to a complete environment, and it's actually something I did a little while ago as a portfolio piece. I bought a Western Saloon 3D environment and added all of the audio into it, but that's paid, so you wouldn't be able to try it for yourself without buying the asset. But then I found out about this. So this is the Sun Temple, which is a really high quality environment asset by Sandro T on the Unity Asset Store, and it's free. But it has no audio in it. It's completely silent, which you might expect because it's a 3D environment asset anyway. But to me, that makes it feel kind of lifeless, kind of still, especially when it's such a good-looking asset, and it's amazing that it's free. So that's what I'm going to do in this video and the videos that follow. I'm going to give this environment some audio and show you how I would go about adding sounds to this scene. Now you might be thinking, that's easy though, right? Why do I think that would be useful? And you might be right. A lot of what I'm going to do here, a lot of the methods I'm going to use are going to be at a beginner level. Even the scripting I'm going to do is going to be fairly straightforward. However, what I'm hoping will be useful is, say if you're new to Unity, even if you've done some of the tutorials before, that this might act as more of a real example of how to add different types of sounds to different types of objects. Or it might be that you're using ready-made environments in the game that you're making, and you'd like to see an example of adding audio to other assets that might be set up in different ways. Or even if you know all of that already, it might just be interesting to see this from the point of view that's from someone that works in game audio. So what am I going to do? Let's have a look at this. So, as an example of the kind of sounds I'm going to add to this, so in the scene there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of the grass is swaying, the trees are swaying, there's wind. There's a lot of environment effects, and it's just crying out for sound. So I'm going to be adding environment sounds to the whole scene. You'll see in here there are these flapping sheets. They could do with some sound. And littered all over the scene, there's one here, there's some up here, are these big roaring fires, each of which I think could do with their own 3D sound effect. The player obviously isn't making any noise, so I want to add footstep sounds. And ideally I'd like to add different types of footstep sounds for different types of surfaces. And I think this is going to be where it will be useful to see how you can add audio to an asset that already exists. You know, there might not be material set up, there might not be tags set up in the way you want. So it'll be a case of working your way around that. Many of these buildings have doors which you can open and close, so they're going to need their own sounds, and you can go inside these buildings, which is going to affect what you can hear and how things sound. So I'm going to be adding or changing that with mixers and effects. And lastly, I'm going to be adding some music to the area, because that's what I do most often anyway. I'm going to add music to all of the outside areas. I don't think that I'm going to add different music for inside the buildings. I'll see how that sounds when we get to that. And then I'm going to add some special music and a special audio zone for the Sun Temple as kind of the highlight of the whole asset. Plus anything else I think of as I work through these videos. So I'm making these videos week to week. They're not all made in advance, so what I have planned for this and what I do might change. And especially if there's anything that you want to see, if there's anything you want me to add into this that you'd like to see, leave me a comment below, and I'll try to include it. So I'm assuming by now that you've already got Unity installed, and for the Sun Temple asset itself, it's free, it's on the Asset Store. I've included a link in the video description below. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by telling you how to install either of those things. But there are a couple of changes I've made to this to make it a bit more comfortable to move around. One of those is on, oh, hello. So on the FPS controller object, I've changed the speed from 7 was the default to 4, and the sensitivity from 200 down to 100, because it was just a little bit too twitchy for my liking. And also on the camera, in the post-processing profile, I have added anti-aliasing and a little bit of motion blur, because it's pretty. Okay, so what are we going to be doing in this video? I'm going to be giving the fires their own 3D sound. So these big roaring fires that are all over the place, I want each of them to have their own 3D positioned sound loop. And you can see there's quite a lot of them. If I filter out the objects, you can see there's quite a few of these fires dotted all over the place. But what I can see from this is, because the text is blue, that all of these are derived from a single prefab. So all I need to do is select any one of these, click select prefab, and now I can edit the prefab object and add sound to all of them. But first I need a sound. So I've got two sound effects that I'm going to layer up to make a single fire loop. So each of these are burning house sound effects from Pole Position, and I got these in the Sonis GDC giveaway in 2018. So if you've not seen this, it's crazy. So Sonis every year, or at least the last 2 years they've done this. In 2017 they gave away 20 gig of sound effects. In 2018 they gave 30 gig of sound effects. GDC I think is this month. I'm looking forward to seeing what they do next. And yeah, it's just a huge amount of library audio sounds, audio material even. And these particular sounds, these are in the Burning House folder by Pole Position in part 5 of 8. But that's about 3 or 4 gig on its own. So what I've done is I've linked just these two files if you just want to get those. But if you have the time, you totally should get this. It's a huge amount of audio. It's great if you're doing more work in sound, if you're doing any sort of audio type stuff, to have this resource of really varied audio material to hand, especially if you bundle it with the 2017 giveaway as well, which I think you can still get. I will link it in the description if you can. I'll check after this. But yeah, Sonis, great stuff. Totally go to their website and download it. So I've got these two tracks. So this one, for example, is very quiet, but it's got a nice rumble in the background that I want. This one, not so quiet, higher energy, but a bit thin. And what I want to do, I don't think either of these on their own are suitable, but together, layered together as a single loop, I think these would work really well. And I'm going to do that using Audacity. So if you haven't heard of Audacity before, it's a very good piece of free audio software. I will link it in the video description, or just search Audacity. It's great, it's free, works really well. I'm going to be using it a lot in these videos, so you'll need to download it if you want to do anything that I'm doing in here. So I'm just going to click and drag these into Audacity. I'm going to make a copy like it asks me to, so that if I change this, it doesn't affect those. And together you can hear it's a much more full sound, so that's what I want to have in the scene. Before I do that though, to make a loop it's going to be easier if this is one file, so I'm just going to export that as a file before I work on it. I'm just going to take this bit out because I don't need it, and then I'm going to export the whole thing as a WAV file. and I'm just going to call it fire layers. And when it asks me what type, I'm going to change it to 24-bit because I know that these files are 24-bit and I don't want to change the bit depth just yet because it's not the final file. Export as one monofile, great, that's what we want. And I'm going to keep the metadata in there, and there it is. Right, so I'm going to clear this because I don't need it. And I'm going to drop that in. Again, I'm going to make a copy. And now this is our layered file. So from this we're going to make a loop. Now I want this section here for the loop. The reason I want that is because I want to avoid some of these bigger cracks and pops that are in the sound. They spike the audio and I don't really want them messing with how the loop sounds. So I want it to be a bit more even, and I could change it with effects, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to pick a section that's a bit cleaner. So with this selected, I'm going to use this tool, trim outside selection, to take away everything else. Then change to the time shift tool and move this to the start. And now we're going to make this loop. I'm going to zoom in a bit, selection tool, and I just want to select a bit at the start, maybe a bit more than that, and I'm going to cut that, click off of the track and paste it, and then with the time shift tool again I'm going to move it to the end and overlap it a little bit. So what's going on here is I've now just cut this off the start, so this bit here lines up exactly with this bit here. So there'll be no changes in pitch, no changes in sound, no pops, no clicks, no nothing. It'll just carry on as if it was starting from where it did originally, which will make it loop. So all I need to do now is crossfade these two bits together. So I'm going to select where it lines up and down over both tracks until I get this yellow marker on the end. So that's selected both. I'm going to click Effect, Crossfade Tracks, and this might not be set to constant power 1 already. It might be constant gain by default, I think, but you want constant power 1 because that will avoid any dips in volume when the crossfade happens. Just press OK, and now you can see that it loops. So if I select everything, transport, loop play, you've got a nice seamless loop. So now I'm going to export this. Before I do that, I want to change the sample rate because these are 96 kilohertz files. That's pretty high. It doesn't need to be more than 44.1, so that's what I'm going to change it to. I'm going to click File, Export. Whoops. File, Export as a wave. I'm going to call it Fire Loop. And I'm going to keep it as 16-bit this time because this is the final file. It doesn't need to be 24-bit in the project. 16-bit is fine. And I'm going to save that. One mono file, great. Keep the metadata. There we go. And I can put this over here and get rid of all this working stuff because I don't need it. Actually, let's put that there. And I can get rid of this because I don't really need this anyway. I'm not going to save it. So I'm now ready to bring the audio into Unity. So I'm going to make an audio folder to hold all of this. And I'm just going to drag this in. And here it is. So this is a good opportunity to make sure that it does in fact loop. Good. Right, so now we need to add this to the prefab object. So I'm going to find the prefab again. So I'm going to select any of the fires. Let's just select this one because it's here. And select the prefab and select FX bonfire A. So I need to add an audio source to this. Just start typing and it appears. And I want this to loop, and I do want it to play on awake. I'm just going to add the clip that I just imported. So this should work now. Actually, note there's one thing I've forgotten. I need to change the spatial blend from 2D to 3D, because otherwise all of the fires are going to be audible as soon as I hit play. So I need to change that to 3D so it's affected by the 3D engine. So if I now hit play, and we have no sound, because there are no audio listeners in the scene. Okay. So for some reason there is not an audio listener in this scene. I don't know why, because there should be. So we're just going to add one. So I'm going to select the camera, add component, audio listener. There's nothing to set on this. It's just a set of ears, if you like, that sits on usually the main camera to hear what's going on in the scene. And it's the position of the audio listener that will affect the 3D effect of the sounds, which is why you sit on the camera. So let's try that again. And we have sound. So we've got sound of that fire over there. And sound of this fire over here. And these two. Now, there are two things that I would like to change about this. So first of all, I think that the distance you could hear the fire from is too much. The default distance. So you don't want to be, say, over here and able to hear this fire if it's not really what is the focus of your attention. Maybe realistically you could hear it from that distance, but I don't think that is a good experience for what we're doing. So I'm going to reduce the distance that you can actually hear these. So I'm going to select the bonfire prefab again. I'm going to select 3D sound settings. I'm going to change this from 500. I'm going to drop it all the way down to 15, which actually sounds like a huge difference, but it hasn't changed it too much, because if you look at the original 3D curve, really the max distance is way further than the volume curve start point. So really you have to be in the hundreds, the low 100s, before you actually start to hear anything, and even then it's not going to be audible till around about here. So we're just going to drop this right down to 15. And what's important to do now is this now no longer reaches the bottom. So if I were to leave this as it was, again, every audio source or every bonfire in the scene would be slightly audible so long as I was above this max distance. Wouldn't matter how far away I was from it, I'd still be able to hear it. So I need to drop this down to 0, or to nothing even, so it goes away. And then to smooth this out, I'm just going to delete that second stop so that it evens it out a little bit. So this should be a bit better now. We can do this without going into play. I'm going to select audio. I'm going to move so that's a bit not more realistic, but I think a bit more useful. So that's one of the things I wanted to fix. And now one of the other issues with this sound is that, as you can see, some of these fires are very close together. So when you get two fires going off like this, you get a sort of phasing effect. There, you can hear it just there. And this is happening because the two audio clips are playing in exact time, or close enough as they can in exact time. So you get this sort of chorusy phasing effect. So what we're going to do to fix that is add a simple script on every audio source that just changes the time position of the clip when it starts playing. So they'll be playing at different times instead. So to do this, all I need to do is add a script. I'm going to call this audio fire controller. And there isn't an object called that, so it's just saying, oh, you want a new script, do you? Yes, I do. Create and add. And I'm going to open this in MonoDevelop to edit it. Great. Now, all I'm going to do is I'm going to add, actually I don't need to make this public, I can just add an audio source variable, and I'm going to call it audio source. And then in start, I want to get the audio source from this object. So this is running from a prefab, so I can't just make it a public audio source and connect the two manually. It needs to find it when it starts. So I'm going to set the audio source variable to whatever audio source is on that object. So I'm going to type audio source equals this dot get component left arrow hello audio source. So that's the type of component I'm looking for. Open and close parentheses and semicolon to close it. So that's going to get the audio source on that object, and then once we've found it, we're going to do something with it. So what I need to do is I need to set the time position of the audio source to a random value, so that it just starts halfway through, a quarter of the way through, anywhere the way through, so long as they don't just all start at the same point. So I'm going to do that by typing audio source dot time, which is the playback position in seconds, equals random dot range. So we're going to set this to a random value between 0 and however long the clip is. We can do that with audio source, the audio source that we're referencing, dot clip, which is whatever clips on that audio source, dot length, which is the length of the clip in seconds. Close parentheses, semicolon to close the statement, and I'm going to save that. Okay, so now when this starts, it's going to change the time position of every audio source on these bonfires. And what I'm going to do to test this is in the profiler, I've already got the audio tab open, and that's going to show me in the channels tab the time value of every audio source that's playing. So let me bring this up a bit and hit play. I can see that the time value is different for each audio source, so we're not going to get that phasing effect of two audio sources next to each other. And I'm just going to find those Sun Temple bonfires, because I think they'll probably be the worst for it, just to test that it's all working okay. So now as we get closer to these, we can stand right in between them with no phasing at all. So that's it. If this video was helpful, or if you at least found it interesting, let me know by clicking like or leaving a comment, or if you really want to do me a favour, by subscribing. If you do subscribe, make sure to also click the bell icon if you want to be notified when the next part in this series is available. And in the next part, I'm going to add environment sounds and start to create audio zones for different types of sounds in the scene and split them up with mixers and effects, that kind of thing. That's all for now though, so I will see you next time.